This is the Actual Fluency Podcast, helping you become a better language learner by providing motivating weekly inspiration, as well as top tips and tricks from expert guests. And now, your host, Chris Broholm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast. This is your weekly language learning podcast where I interview language learners from all around the world to find out their secrets to learning languages and also culture, identity, living abroad, and many other topics that are relevant to the people of the world today. So I'm really excited to have you here. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show. If you're a long-time listener, welcome back. It's good to see you back, and thank you so much for tuning in. And today's interview is with Irina Pravet, who is currently living in Finland. She's originally from, she was born in Romania and moved to Canada at a young age. And we get to talk about identity and living in a new country and all those feelings that you get when you are not in your home environment. And Irina is currently living in Finland, which has been a big topic of hers recently. She's done a TED Talk called "Can You Learn the Hardest Language in the World?" So obviously a very interesting person, also a wonderful person. I've met her several times, and so I'm really looking forward to this, and I hope you enjoy it as well. And just before we start the show, if you have an interesting language learning story, or if you know somebody who's done something interesting with language learning you think others could benefit from, please go to actualfluency.com/guest or send the person you'd like to hear from that link. It's a short questionnaire, it takes 2 minutes to fill out, and it's basically an application for you to join me on the show because I want to hear from more learners out there. I have a lot of people who I interviewed a few times, and I think it's time to hear from new people. So if you've learned a lot of languages, or if you've learned them in an interesting way, or if you've worked on any other thing, just send me an application, actualfluency.com/guests. So see you in the next one and enjoy this one. Just a quick note before the recording begins. I want to just apologize quickly for the audio quality in this episode. The microphone was not switched on, and therefore what you hear when I speak is the built-in laptop mic. So it's a little bit roomy and it's not very good. But I hope you enjoyed this discussion with Irina anyway. Well, I just want to formally welcome you to the show, and thank you so much for coming on. And I already gave a brief introduction just before we came on, but maybe just give people the clipped up version of how you ended up in Finland and how you got interested in language learning and culture.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm really happy to be here. So thank you so much for inviting me on, Chris. All right. So how did I end up in Finland? Well, basically, I guess since you guys are interested in languages, that kind of plays into it.
For sure, yeah.
So I went to Germany in 1996 for the first time, and I was 8 years old. And I heard German for the first time, and I was like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful language I've ever heard, much to the surprise of, my parents and all my friends and all that stuff. So I said that one day I'm going to learn German. So I studied it a bit in high school, and then I sort of made that my major, or like my whatever, the focus of my university years was just to learn German. So I ended up doing an exchange in Germany, like when was this? 13 years after actually having gone to Germany that one time and then having fallen in love with the language. And then in the process on exchange, I met my partner, Juha, who's Finnish. And after graduating university, I had one semester after I came back from exchange. And then I was like, well, I don't really have a reason to stay in Canada. And I kind of want to see where this relationship goes and what happens with it. So I moved here, and here I am still 6 years later. So
fantastic.
Yeah. And we're engaged now. So.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. So, so that's the story of how I ended up in Finland, I guess.
Awesome. Well, it could be a book, I guess, a book title anyway. It's a funny title. How I ended up in Finland, because it sounds a little bit strange, but on the other hand, I mean, it's not that weird. It's pretty normal, I guess.
I think people here would just eat that up.
Right.
Like,
Maybe.
yeah, how did you end up in Finland?
Yeah, we'd love to know.
Yeah.
I guess you get asked that if you go out and meet new people. They're like, "What are you doing here?"
Yes. Oh my God, word for word. Yes. What do you do here?
Yeah, that's what I get here too. Actually, it's pretty funny.
Okay.
I guess it's universal around the world. If you're not from the country and it's not really a very popular immigration country, then people are like, what are you actually doing here? They sound a little bit suspicious almost.
Yeah, and I think it's also the fact that I mean, if it's not an English-speaking country, then people will be speaking English as a second language or as another language than their native language. So then the way they say it, they're like, "Wait, I want to know what you're doing here, but I'm not sure how to phrase this correctly." And then it just ends up like, "What do you do here? Why are you here?"
Right.
which I don't know. It's just I think that's probably a pretty common question anywhere outside of like, I don't know, the English-speaking countries and then the like Western European countries, at least in Northern Europe.
Yeah.
I know this question is quite frequent. Also, like in my native Romania, like if somebody's even visited Romania, I'm always like, really? What did you do there? Why'd you go there? That's amazing. What did you think? Tell me everything.
Right.
So I don't know if that's the similar reaction that you're getting now in Budapest.
Oh yeah, for sure. People are, but most people they're like, so you studying here, because that's apparently what every foreigner does here.
Yeah.
And then when I say no, they're like, what do you do here? So
yeah, you must be courting one of our beautiful women, or like what is this?
I don't know.
Yeah.
They think I'm a spy or something. I don't know. But anyway, been following you for quite a while. We met at the Polyglot gathering in Berlin. Had a lot of fun there, and I've read and seen a lot of your work, including the Language Catalyst website, blog, and also your presentations. That was the one at the gathering, which was very, very deep. I think I can use that word.
I think it went pretty deep. Yeah.
It was a very deep talk. We can get into that in a moment, about identity and that kind of thing, and where to call home, because I read somewhere. Well, we can just jump into it now. Why not?
Yeah, let's go.
Because I read you said somewhere. I forget where it is. You said somewhere that you can make anywhere home with the right attitude, with enough work. And I just wanted to talk about that a bit, because a lot of people that I talk to, especially people who are expats and try and live in other countries for maybe even, let's say, more than a year, they all tell me that, yeah, I had a lot of fun. It was nice, but I never really felt like it was home. And I never really fully, even if I spoke the language, and we're talking about, of course, language learners, so they start learning language immediately and they get to really good levels. I'm sure you know Alex. Alex Rawlings lived here in Budapest for a year last year.
Yeah.
And he got to a really good level in Hungarian. And he said, no matter how good my level was, I still felt outside the normal sort of culture, rhythm, whatever you call it. So what was this you said about you can make anywhere home? What do you base that on?
Well, I guess the first part is to define what home is for you, because I think a lot of us take that for granted and it happened naturally. So just like you said, the kind of normal rhythm, like what is the normal rhythm, and what really makes a place feel like home. And I think that's going to be different for every single person, or you might at least have like different categories that people can fall into in terms of what they consider home. And then kind of with that intention of like, okay, this is now what I want, then kind of building your home from there. So first knowing what it is and really realizing what it is you're missing. And at least for me, I know that like I've lived in a lot of different places. I was born in Romania. I grew up in Canada, in Montreal first. So like I was like fully French speaking, then in Toronto. So like then all my friends spoke English until I went to a French school, like whatever. So I moved around in schools a lot. I moved around in cities. And even having done that as a young kid, I kind of, by the time I was in my 20s, I sort of realized that a lot of people who were saying I miss home were actually very nostalgic about something that wasn't necessarily that way. So like even on exchange, we had a lot of friends who were like, oh, the weather is crap here. And, we were in Mannheim and it was gray, like almost all the time, except, like once a week when there was sunshine. So then you'd have like a lot of people complaining about how at home it's always really nice weather and blah, blah, blah. But in the end, it's like, okay, but you just have this nostalgic picture of the place where you came from. But then is that why you left? Like, why did you leave? You probably left for a reason. So I think like being really honest with yourself and trying to be as aware. So everyone is probably going to be yearning for home, longing for home. Everyone's going to experience some sort of nostalgia. And as they say, the grass is always greener on the other side. But at the same time, it's good to kind of get clear about what is it that home really is. And I think that took me years to figure out, because I was just like longing for this kind of like almost childhood thing where you go to school every day and you see your friends every day and you're like, that's nice, but that's not how like the adult world works. So it's also a bit challenging when you're like, out of school and then in a foreign country, suddenly like, even if you went back home, you still wouldn't have the same situation.
Right.
Did that answer any of your questions?
Well, I don't know if there are any answers to this particular questions. I guess it's more of a philosophical debate in a way, but as you speak, I am just thinking that it is a really deep and fascinating topic, because when I've lived in Denmark for 26 out of 28 years of my life. Yet, if you ask me, do you feel at home there? I would say like, not really. I mean, I have a very different view on the world than most of the Danish people I meet. And that's not a bad thing, that's good to have that kind of diversity. But that means that I can't really, if I went to Denmark to live, it will feel very strange. But then again, where is home? If I've lived in England, in Denmark, and now in Hungary, and I've never really felt like, I guess maybe home is everywhere. Maybe that's the counter argument, that it's not that special.
But then what is the feeling of home? Like, how do you define home for yourself?
Right. I think that's just where I live. It's tough for me to put a lot of extra value to it, I guess. I don't know how I got to this point, but it just seems to me that I can be very lonely in Denmark as well. If we talk about home, that's often people say they miss home is another way of saying I'm pretty lonely in the place I went to.
Yeah.
So I would say if I can be in Denmark, where I speak the language perfectly, and I have a lot of contacts, both family and friends, and I still feel lonely, then that cannot be where I should be at that time of my life, I would guess.
Yeah. But then I think like I can really relate with this loneliness thing, because that's also something I was going through and kind of go through on and off. Like it goes in phases. Living abroad, you don't really have the same kind of, let's say, like social network, or sort of, I don't even know if it would be better in Canada anymore, because I've been abroad for so long. But like I was thinking about this concept of like home. If I were at home, then I'd have my friends, and I'm like, wait, but I have friends here, so what is it specifically? so like I can give you this example, because I went deeper than that. I was like, okay, I have friends, but obviously I'm expecting something specific from them that, like, my Canadian friends would do, my Finnish friends maybe wouldn't do. So what is that thing? So I started going deeper, and I realized, like, I would like for somebody to like just pick up the phone and call me, except technology has also developed so people will like message you instead, which doesn't feel like you can send anybody a message. It takes like 1 second, but to really call them, that's like a big commitment. And or then like call you or text you to like hang out or something. And I felt a lot of people were, we were sending messages back and forth, but you wouldn't actually like physically see them.
Right.
And so I was thinking, okay, well, for me, home is at least having friends like physically close by and seeing them like in the flesh. And just by realizing that, I thought, okay, so who do I have in my life that I could do that with? And at the time when this was happening, I had a bunch of friends who I'd met at gymnastics, because I was doing gymnastics. And they would message me like every couple of weeks to be like, hey, come to the gym with us. Hey, we're going to go train. And I realized like, oh shit, I have these people in my life. I just wasn't thinking like, I mean, you're not thinking home and you're not thinking like all of these things, but just by spinning it around in that way, you're like, wait, now I can actually like, you know, put my attention here and be like, this is great. And thank my friends, and which I did, because I was actually like, oh, you know, I don't know if I want to go to the gym, blah, 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 and making excuses when I was like, wait, this is actually what I need. But even if it's staring you right in the face, you might not notice it because, you know, you feel lonely. So I think that's normal to like acknowledge also when being abroad, because all your friends from back home are like, wow, you have this amazing life. You're doing all these amazing things. And you're like, yes, I've moved halfway across the world to sit in my apartment by myself.
Yeah, it's true. That's really true, actually.
Yeah.
That's really true. But I mean, it is kind of cool also to travel a lot, but sometimes it's not better than being home with your family and, you know.
Yeah, no, I'm not like dissing traveling.
Yeah.
I was just saying it's not always like, fabulous. Especially like friends in Canada were always like, but you live in Europe. And I'm like, yeah, look on a map and look how easy it is to access like quote unquote Europe from like Tampere, Finland, where I was at the time, or anywhere in Finland, basically. It's not like just a train ride away exactly. So, yeah.
Well, I still think it's an extremely fascinating topic. Also, we talk sometimes on the podcast about moving abroad, because I know a lot of people listening are learning languages because they want to move abroad at some point, or they know that down the line they're gonna travel the world and see something. So that's why I think it's a really relevant topic. And what I think is also, you mentioned the technology has changed the way we interact as human beings. That's definitely true. I remember back when I was a kid, I would just walk to somebody's house and I'd just be like, are you home? And if they weren't, I'd just go away. And if they were, it's like, hey, do you want to hang out?
Yeah.
And today it's like, unless you have like a calendar confirmation that people are in, you don't go over to visit them, even if they're a few minutes away, you know. But
well, at least like in the Nordic countries.
Right. Well, that's true. Yeah, we are a little bit cold when it comes to socializing sometimes.
But I've heard in like Australia, that's different. I've actually never been to Australia, but I met some people who had moved from Australia to Finland, and like they were really shocked.
I can imagine, yeah.
So,
but it's also helping us, the technology, and what I would say down here has really helped me in Hungary. Of course, first of all, knowing people before I moved was really powerful. I had some friends who were not Hungarian who already lived here, so that we could talk about the experiences.
Yeah.
And also, I would say you need to do a lot more work up front, probably. So what I did was I started going to meetups, and I just looked online for language meetups. So it's a German meetup. There's a Russian meetup, and I just tried to go. There's also these international whatever relations, blah blah.
Yeah.
And they have these massive parties that are basically like socializing and networking. And I think if you put the extra effort into it, you will also get to a much more comfortable point. Because if you just move to a place where you don't know anyone, you can't expect to just, randomly make friends on the street walking to without doing any effort. I think some people might sometimes get into that trap. And then they get really lonely, and then they move back home after 6 months or whatever.
And I think it's good to kind of anticipate, like, okay, what are my challenges going to be? So like you said, you were talking with friends beforehand, like, hey, what is it like there?
Right.
And kind of they can teach you what to anticipate, or what to kind of work towards. Like, these are the challenges you'll have. This is the research you need to do, or that kind of stuff. And sort of, also knowing yourself as a person, and okay, what am I likely to, am I likely to just turn inwards, or am I likely to, I don't know, have a meltdown and cry and call my mom, and whatever it could be, that you can kind of plan and anticipate. For me, it was like, I knew that it was going to be dark and cold here.
Yeah.
Okay, so Canadian, so I don't really need to prepare for the cold. But the darkness, I was like mentally preparing myself the fall before I moved to Finland. So I moved in January, which is like, well, almost, it's pretty much the darkest time of the year. And so when I was in Montreal, like 2 months before, I heard people complaining about like, oh, it's 5 o'clock and it's dark. And I would just kind of like laugh to myself, like, okay, like I can't be like those people because it's going to be way worse. So I tried to mentally prepare myself for that. And I don't think anyone ever really gets used to the darkness. And
No. Hello?
Hello? Hi, sorry.
Is everything
I
okay?
cut out. Yeah. No, just the phone rang at the same time because I'm calling you from my phone, but it's fine.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So
the weather.
The darkness. I read you wrote about it on the blog at one point, and it seemed pretty dark. I mean, not just like actually dark. I meant also it seemed very emotionally dark at that time. Is that true? And when you have really, because I guess that's where the winter depression term comes from, where it's just dark all the time. You don't get the D vitamin, and you sleep all the time, and I mean,
and it's like hard to. I mean, I've been here, I think 6 winters, and it really depends. Like if you have a job and a place to go, it's so much easier than if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're like a student, like writing your thesis. That can be tough. If you're unemployed, that can be even more tough. I mean, you definitely need some kind of routine to keep you going. I mean, it's really amazing once the weather starts to change. And I don't want to spend the whole podcast talking about the weather, but it does really affect us up here. So
it does down here too, for sure. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I think living in Denmark, one of the advantages, and a lot of people are actually surprised to hear this, but the weather in Denmark is incredibly mild, and it's incredibly mediocre. So the summer is not very hot, and the winter is not very cold in general.
Yeah.
So it means that the difference in seasons isn't that pronounced as when I came here. And I was like, oh, I'm going south, no problem. And then the summer was like 40 degrees heat, and I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. How can I live in 40 degrees? And I was melting and blah, blah, blah. And then the winter came, and I remember coming home New Year's Eve, and it was minus 15. And, summer was so great. Even with the heat, I was complaining about the heat every day. By the way, never complaining about the weather again. And then we were just out drinking beer in the beer gardens, and just the sun was, at midnight, it was still 30 degrees, and you were just in shorts every day. And people were so happy and smiling, and all the cafes had tables outside, and people were just enjoying their lives. And then winter came, all the tables are gone, and all the fun is gone, and it's like people go to these
Are the
pubs.
people gone too?
Yeah, a lot of them. A lot of them. I mean, of course, inside is still full, but considering they used to fill up inside and outside, there's a lot of people who obviously don't go out in the winter. And if you do, it's more like, okay, let's go and get drunk somewhere. It's so miserably cold that everyone's just depressed. And I really felt it. And I didn't think so, because I always liked winter. But I guess I like Danish winter, which is just like you could wear an extra jacket or an extra scarf or whatever, and you'd be fine. And people were, because we don't have that amazing summer, there's not that huge difference between the seasons.
Yeah, people definitely open up. Like the moment that it starts to get lighter out and warmer out, then people are spending time outside. It's easier to get together with friends because you just, grab some like picnic items and go take a blanket to a park. And somehow it's just easier to see people as well. I remember a friend of mine, like it was in the fall, like right around when school was starting. And it was... Yeah, so it must have been like September, and she was like, oh shit, like I still don't have a boyfriend and the winter is coming. And I just thought that was hilarious because coming from Canada, we don't have the darkness to the same extent. So it was like, we're just going to hole up for a couple of months and you just like grab a person and like, it sounded like such a funny thing to me. But now I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. Because it's probably like, it's a lonely couple months otherwise.
Yeah, I guess it's very practical, and you get other needs met, I guess. So.
But I've also noticed, like even here, people will also open up if there's like, okay, so one time there was this huge snowstorm, and we had Like before that, it was really gray and it was really dark, and just you could sense this kind of weight on everybody's shoulders. Like when you walk on the street, you basically can't here you don't make eye contact with people. That's generally like considered an invasion of their privacy. So you just don't have this way of like connecting with people. Like in Canada, you can look at someone in the eye and smile at them, and that's totally normal. Here, that's not cool. So basically, like then the snowstorm hits. And I got on the bus, which is usually like dead quiet, but like the bus was full of people and everyone was talking to each other. Yeah, so I noticed, I was like, interesting. And I'm always kind of observing these things, trying to put it together. So I'm like, okay, when it's dark, people feel that they need to suffer. And like whatever it is that's kind of, pushing or weighing on them is kind of in their heads. But the moment there's kind of an external enemy, like a crap load of snow, then suddenly everyone's like, oh yeah, okay, this is a real thing, and we can talk about it and we can kind of bond over it. So actually the bus driver had to tell the person sitting in the front row, like, please stop talking to me, I need to focus, which I've never ever seen that someone was so chatty and excited to talk to the bus driver, and the bus driver just couldn't handle it because he had to like maneuver through the snow. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, but hey, let's talk about identity and other stuff, because I don't want to be like weather.
Yeah, weather. I think we talked about the weather, but I mean, I think it does tie into especially how you feel. The weather will play a part. And I didn't know that before, and now I do. So
yeah, no matter where you move, it's still gonna be some you're still gonna need to adapt to a certain extent.
Yeah, the external relations of where you live.
Yeah, so, and it might affect people around you as well. So.
Right, and that in turn affects you. That's what happened to me, I think. But anyway, let's talk about identity, because that's another big thing. And I mean, obviously, you've grown up in a few different places. So how do you find your identity? Maybe talk. I don't know if you can talk pre-Finland and then post-Finland afterwards. But I mean, growing up in different places must have been hard to sort of answer the question. What is my identity? Where am I from? What am I supposed to like? And
yeah. I mean, if I had to answer what is my identity, or how do I see my identity in one word, I would probably say fluid. I mean, I've always kind of been jealous of people who could just say like, I am, and then, insert nationality or city name or adjective of city name, like in here. So I guess when I was living in Canada, then, well, here's the thing. In Canada, being an immigrant is not a bad word. So like I noticed that since moving here, and with a lot of the kind of political climate lately, like immigration is not like looked upon so favorably these days. And regardless, I don't want to get into this like Pandora's box or open this can of worms right now.
No, that's okay.
But regardless, it's just in Canada, like everyone is from somewhere else.
Right.
So everyone kind of has multiple identities to a certain extent. Like even if you're, for example, going to school in Toronto, your home might be like Pakistani, or it might be like full out like Filipino, and then at school we all speak the same language, and we all like adhere to kind of one culture, one identity. I mean, not one identity, but like one cultural identity, let's say. Right. And then in your home, people will say like, well, my parents are Chinese. So like you kind of get an idea of like at home there are different rules, and everyone's sort of growing up in these one foot in each kind of place.
I guess that helps a lot because everyone is from somewhere. So I mean, somewhere else. So it's kind of like a mishmash of cultures and nationalities. It would be worse if you moved to, let's say, Finland and had to go to a Finnish high school where you were probably the only one who wasn't from Finland.
Yeah, I mean, it's different. So I don't know what that would have been like. But at least in Canada, like I was very vocal about my Romanianness because everybody else is Canadian. Like so you're gonna say what's different about you.
Right.
And of course, there are also the Canadians who have been there for like generations and generations. But usually they also know like, yeah, my great grandmother was Russian, and like, all that stuff. So people keep track. But yeah, so that was maybe pre Finland. I thought that was like, yeah, I was just like, yeah, I'm Romanian Canadian, but I didn't usually have to explain the Canadian part because I was usually talking to Canadian people.
Right.
And then when I would go abroad, like I spent a couple summers in Germany, then I would, what would I say? I probably would say like I'm Canadian, Romanian. I don't remember. I think that's what it was, more or less. So then when I moved to Finland, I think my mom said I had really high expectations for fitting in because like this was the second immigration in my young life. So I kind of thought like, yeah, I'm just going to go there and I'm going to like be as Finnish eventually as I am Canadian now, which was like really high
ambitious
standards. Yeah, very ambitious. But like I can't say that that's not exactly true. Like I still go back to Canada and I'm like, oh my God, there are so many people here, and I start to like freak out and I like need my space. and I forget like when the first time I went to the Polyglot gathering in Berlin, I arrived there as a Finn with my like Finnish identity on, and somebody like made eye contact with me and I like freaked out and looked away. And then I was like, oh right, I think this place is friendly. Not that Finns aren't friendly. Anyway, like I think this is, you know, a kind of neutral territory where people are looking to make friends. Right. So then I like looked back at the person, but I'd already offended them, and you know, like then you have to kind of like train your brain to be like, okay, this is the situation I'm in, so put on the appropriate behavior right. for that. So definitely I would say that part of me is Finnish and part of me is Canadian and part of me is Romanian, and I have the two different Canadian sides, the English speaking and the French speaking one. And I guess I like to keep identity. I think the best way Okay, hold on. Let me go back. I think the best way to kind of really honor your experience in different places is by having like a language to communicate it in. So at least for me, in terms of souvenirs and keeping track of the places where I've been and the people I've met and the experiences I've had, I try to kind of encapsulate those in a language. So I really take like great pride in the languages that I speak because they say something about where I've been. And that's also why I call myself an accidental polyglot, because I didn't even know the word. I didn't even know there was a community before a couple of years ago. So it was just kind of a mishmash of the places I'd been and the things I'd been interested in over time.
That's cool. It seems like you are an identity assimilator in a way, where you take what you really enjoy about all the places you've been, all the people you've met, and you just combine it into who you are today.
Yeah, I try my very best to do that, and it's not always easy. I could say that when I first got to Finland, like the kind of culture that I like viewed here was like the complete opposite of my natural way of being. So right. Like really social and talkative and everything, and especially in the Nordic countries and especially in Finland, like people tend to be more reserved, more quiet, more the opposite, and I go in this in my deep talk, as you called it. But I think anyone can kind of figure this stuff out by really staying open to it and trying to resist closing and saying like, no, I don't like this. This is wrong. I want to go home. Like everyone's going to have those days. I have those days as well. But just coming back to it and being like, okay, maybe I was being too rash. Let me give this a second thought. Maybe there's a different way to interpret this situation so that we don't like get offended, because when we're off the boat or like fresh in a country, we're going to kind of get it all wrong. We're going to misinterpret people's intentions. We're going to misinterpret situations, and it kind of trips you up. And the idea is just to keep going, to keep trying to find new ways of opening up to that. And eventually you'll also form some kind of identity, especially in that language. If you're wanting to speak it, that's going to make more sense in that actual language than translated into English.
Right. Well, let's talk about languages.
Yeah, let's.
Because that's a big part of our identity, isn't it? The way we communicate is an extension of how we think, which is basically identity. So you said you started with Romanian, I guess, at home? Or did you start with English?
Yeah, Romanian.
Romanian, English, French, German? Okay, in between there somewhere?
Yeah, so I was born in Romania. My whole family spoke Romanian, and my grandma was actually a linguist and a translator.
Oh, wow.
My dad went to like German kindergarten, and my grandmother translated for the Italian radio station. And she spoke 5 languages before the internet. So
That's
like
pretty impressive.
it really, really is. And I guess like as a kid, I was like, I want to speak all the same languages my
Ah,
grandmother spoke. That was like, something. I just talked a lot, really. And to me, it was fascinating to be able to, converse in different tongues. And I went to like an English speaking kindergarten in Romania. So I learned some songs, and I learned how to ask permission to go to the bathroom, basically. Like
very important.
yeah, the basic survival skills. And then when we moved to Canada, we moved to Montreal, and the children of immigrants back in the 90s, I think this is still the case in Quebec, they have to go to Francophone school.
Right.
So it's just to maintain the French language in Quebec. So I was in this class where all the kids were foreign, and we were all learning French. And we had this amazing teacher, and we had like rabbits and all these animals, and it was like children heaven, and all you had to do was just speak French.
Right.
So I think unlike lots of people who have tried to learn French, I think the classroom setting really I had a favorable experience there.
Right.
Yeah, so then went on to I think I picked up English from TV. I just kind of had some words from my kindergarten, and then I watched a lot of TV because we lived downtown. So instead of playing outside, I was watching TV and picking up English. And I know even today, like a lot of kids love English just because it gives them like the ability to communicate with almost anybody. So kids really enjoy that, and maybe that's what happened to me at the time. Then I studied when I got to high school later, so German, as I mentioned, and then I threw in Spanish because I was like a French school, so I was like, Spanish, that won't be hard, and I enjoyed it. I decided to focus on Spanish in high school and German in university, and then came Finnish.
Nice.
So yeah, all of the other languages were just, a warm up.
Yeah, it just happened.
for what was to come.
So let's talk about that, because Hungarian and Finnish are often that what they call them, the cousins, or maybe brothers or something like that.
No, yeah.
They can't seem to figure out where the connection is. But anyway, I know your pain for sure. So how did you prepare for the language part? Because you said you were living in Germany when you met your partner, and you then had another semester back home. Did you start to learn Finnish then?
I actually, when we were in Germany, I picked up a book in his room one day, and it had like, I was like, I'll just read the first page for fun. Like, I didn't speak any Finnish, right? So I understood 2 words. It was like a novel, but I read the first page and I understood is and night, because I knew how to say good night. So those were the 2 words I picked up. And then that day, just because, I'm a freak of sorts, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this.
What?
I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to learn this. Except at that point, I didn't really actually think I would. I was just like, let's just say I will and see what happens. And so I started asking him a million questions, none of which he could really answer. So then we had to start Googling things, because there's Finnish, like Hungarian, has cases, but they're inflected. You inflect words and add cases onto the end. So he was like, I don't know why that is this way and this is that way. So it all started with questions, and I figured out like a little bit in those months that we were in Germany. Then I went to Finland that summer to like check it out, see what it was all about. And I bought a book from start to finish.
No way. That's not what it was called.
Yes,
Oh,
that's
no.
what it's called. By Layla White, and I wrote her fan mail later,
Oh,
and
yeah.
like went to visit her in her office hours because she works at the university, and she like didn't believe me that I read her book from cover to cover and loved it. She was like, "You're joking, right?" And I was like, "No, I really liked it." And I do recommend it to people. But yeah, then I went back to Canada for like 4 months, and I had way too many courses, and I kind of actually forgot a lot of stuff I learned. And then I moved back to Finland, then I moved to Finland for the first time, only time. And then I was studying like in the mornings. So what I figured out was that because it was so dark when I got there, I couldn't wake up before like 11, and I'm a morning person who usually just jumps out of bed at 7, but I couldn't get up before 11, and then I would go to the city by like 2, and then it would start to get dark, so it was just horrible. So I realized I have to like set an alarm and drag myself out of bed, and the only time I could motivate myself to study anything or read anything was in the morning. So if it wasn't the first thing I did, study Finnish in the morning, then I wouldn't do it for the rest of the day. I didn't have the willpower.
Right.
It didn't work. So
I've heard that before, that our willpower is like a muscle that gets weakened every day. So if you do the worst first, then you're usually good.
yeah, or I don't know if it was like the weather, we're not going back there again, but like it was just, yeah, that was the only thing that worked for me at the time. And I started attending also this class.
Oh, yeah?
A couple times a week. I think I had like 2 different classes at that point.
So like a group of people and one teacher, and pretty classic.
Yeah, I mean, not my favorite classes, but they were nice to at least be around other people. But in terms of learning the language, I didn't feel like they were super, super helpful. But, you know, it depended on the day. So
Of course.
And what we were
Well, it
learning.
can't hurt, really. I guess that's the counterpoint, is that a lot of people either really like language classes or really diss them. And I feel like, well, it's a nice little social thing, and it doesn't hurt for sure, and you can get friends who are in a similar situation.
Yeah.
You might get some sympathy from Finnish people, but you're gonna get a lot of sympathy from someone trying to learn it as well.
Yeah, but I think the tough part there is like bridging that gap. So it's not just like, okay, sympathy from Finns or like the, sympathy from people living through the exact same thing, because then you either end up like just having foreign friends and hanging out with foreign people and never speaking Finnish, or just like not hanging out with anybody because you've like pissed off all your Finnish friends because you're complaining about their country and their language like all the time. So finding some kind of balance between those two, where you're not only hanging out with people and speaking English, but also not like mad at the world. I think that is like the holy grail, and I think it's kind of that's the tough part.
Yeah, it's not easy at all, and especially when you go to countries where you don't speak the language at all and don't have any connections. You hear about a lot of people getting stuck in the English-speaking bubble or whatever language that they have, because it's hard to meet locals. It just full stop, I guess.
Yeah, I mean here I don't think it's hard to meet, or as hard to meet locals maybe as in other places, or like you definitely meet locals everywhere, but then at least in Finland people will speak English. Everybody speaks English, so it's a matter of finding ways to speak Finnish with them, or at least to show them that you're interested in Finnish. And I can tell you how I did this. So before I could actually form sentences or have conversations with my Finnish friends in Finnish, what I would do is I would just drop in like words that I knew in Finnish. So it makes me sound kind of weird when I'm just like slipping in words in different languages into like one sentence or one conversation. But what that did is that in their minds, it kind of branded me as someone who's excited and learning and like, really interested and like teach me things. I'm here. I'm open. I'm ready.
That's interesting. I've never heard anyone say that before.
Really?
No, and I have done a lot of interviews, so it's kind of surprising, but I've never heard anyone say that they, during the early stages of a language, would just sprinkle in whatever they know when speaking. I think that's pretty cool.
I mean, I didn't even realize I was doing it maybe, but it's like I'm really stubborn. And I notice, at least like as a native English speaker, you automatically get put into the box of like, okay, this person doesn't speak any other language other than English. And I get like really mad when I'm in that box. And I can like tell, because I'll meet people, I'll like say my name in Finnish, I'll like say hello, and then I get this like, I mean hello in Finnish, and like say a bunch of stuff in Finnish, and the only thing that person has heard, if they have heard me speak English, is like English. It's like all the words that I said in Finnish don't matter. This doesn't really happen anymore, but it does happen sometimes. The words will just, it's like they heard English because they heard me speaking English, and I immediately went into that box. So I will do whatever I can to avoid being put into that box.
Right.
And so then it gets to like extreme things like sprinkling words in. But actually the reason I think I do that is because you'll start using a word. Like when I was living in Germany, we were always talking about the S-Bahn or the U-Bahn. And then you just like forget what that word is in any other language. So I would talk to my mom and I would tell her about the S-Bahn and the U-Bahn, and then drop in all these German words until she was like, I don't know what you're saying. So then when I came here, I just did the same thing. And then I realized that this is actually wedging me in. I'm like forcing my way in, like, look, I'm trying to learn and I'm excited to learn. So please teach me. Because I'm also really impatient. I don't like studying by myself forever with language books or like I don't use any apps or anything because I like to talk to people. Right. So the earliest I can talk to people, you know, and even if it's in English, then just sprinkle something in there or a few sentences in Finnish just to show, or even like, hey friend, do you know what I just learned? And then you say your sentence and then they're like, good job. And then you're like, okay, now we can speak English. But just something to keep you going, even if it sounds super lame, but that there's some kind of feeling of moving forward.
I think that's a great idea because certainly for myself, one of the problems that I have when I'm learning a new language is fear of, or the professionalism, no, not professionalism, what's it called? Perfectionism.
Yeah. I thought you were just involved in professional stuff.
Yeah, just professional language learner. So step aside. Perfectionism. And I think that your technique could diffuse the whole tension there is about, every sentence I say has to be perfect or at least understood.
Yeah.
When in fact you're starting to learn the language, it doesn't really matter as long as you just use what you know. And if you only know a couple of words each sentence or just one word, just using it is going to slowly make you more used to speaking the language, and also it's going to like increase your confidence to the point where you can include more and more words. And because that's a problem for me. I don't know, would you consider yourself mostly extroverted or introverted? Without putting yourself in a box.
I'm gonna go for ambivert.
Right.
I mean, like if you've seen me at the Polyglot conference, most people would be like clear extrovert. But at the Polyglot conference, I don't sleep because I get so like hyper overstimulated that like then I'm up for 6 days and I so I would say like I definitely need my quiet space, and then I also really, really need my people.
I'm fascinated by it because like when I meet you, you're really like extroverted and really interested in meeting people, and if you see someone standing a little bit to the side, you're like, hey, what's up, you know. Really.
Well, that's also at the Polyglot gathering. That's just a really different feel where you just go there and you're like, okay, this is going to be an awesome weekend of just meeting like a bunch of really amazing people and we're all super nerdy excited about like cases and grammar and articles and other things that I'm not nerdy enough to know the names of. But you know.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting because I definitely also switch sometimes, but I would say I'm probably more introverted than extroverted when it comes to just speaking a new language in public, even at the gathering. But just interesting also to how that learner profile connects.
But try out this like sprinkling words thing.
Let
me know how it works for you.
I think
and also just I think it takes less willpower to do that because, for example, you have this like fork in the road. When you open your mouth and you're like, what language am I going to speak? Right? Am I going to fall back on English or am I going to go for it and just try in Hungarian? Right?
Yeah.
And say that day you have just less willpower. You're tired,
It
whatever.
does happen, yeah.
Or you're in a bad mood and then you go for English and then you start like getting mad at yourself. And you're like, crap, you know, why did I just spend like whatever, how many hours memorizing vocabulary? And now I'm just defaulting to English. And then you start like beating yourself up, right? But if you sprinkle a couple words in there, you know, it's like, look, Chris, I'm trying. Like you're trying something so that it automatically like gives you some bonus points with yourself. At least as a fellow perfectionist, I can also attest to you can try different ways, and that's what I meant by staying open and not just like giving up entirely or like, you know, like I'll try tomorrow. Then it's like, well, maybe I could do a few things right now.
Yeah.
So.
But I think I'm improving definitely, which is I'm happy that that's possible because I could fear that once you're in your set ways, that it'd be hard to change. But actually, the more I talk about my struggles as a perfectionist and introverted, the better it does get. You know, I do speak a lot more now. I guess it also depends on your level in the language, but I do try and speak more now, and I don't get. If I fail to use it, I don't punish myself for it. And if I had to switch to English, that's fine too. I tried, but if I could at least go into a shop with the idea of using Hungarian as much as possible, then I've kind of done as well as I can. But it's a day by day thing for sure. If I feel great and I've had great sleep, then I'm just running into the shop and speaking Hungarian like it's my native language. But if it's a little bit of a quiet day and I had a bad sleep and you go into the shop and you're just tired and you're just like, oh, can I just have a sandwich, please? And you're like, of course you know how to say that in Hungarian, but it's just, you don't want to, I don't know. I guess, I don't know what it is. Is it embarrassment or something? There's something you don't want. And you get defensive. And what I would like to say also to the listeners who suffer from the same is just, like, don't worry too much about that because nothing bad can come of it, it seems.
And like when you need like some time off, just like give yourself that time, because if you're just pushing yourself to be perfect all the time, it's quite exhausting. And one piece of advice, another thing that I also found myself doing, because I felt like I was suffering a lot in silence. Like I would go into the shops and I'd be like, I was laughing because like people here tend to be very fair. Like they have light hair and like light skin. And in the winter, I would pull my hat like over my eyebrows because my eyebrows are like dead giveaway that I'm not Finnish, you know. And I would just pull my hat over my head and go in there and like pretend like I was Finnish, like I was not fooling anybody, you know. But this is what I mean, like the silent suffering and like almost. My number one nightmare when I first moved here was that someone on the street would ask me something and I wouldn't have any idea what they said. But then after a couple months, you notice that nobody talks to you on the street, so it's fine.
Right.
But yeah, I felt like I didn't really give in to that like speaking English thing, and it was so hard. Like I was so hard on myself. And it was a really silent suffering. So I think if I could do it again, I would just be a little bit nicer to myself. Right. That I like, you know, just do it when you need to do it, and don't like live in fear that someone will come and speak something to you and you can't just default to English. So,
but that's definitely like the perfectionism. I think because you're fearing something that is just it's not possible. I mean, there's no bad outcome, but it's the irrational part of our brain that's playing tricks with us. And I what I just try to say to myself is just don't worry. But I mean, of course I worry half the day anyway. It's like, will I ever learn this language? And I mean, what's that?
Oh yeah, no, sorry, finish your sentences.
Your TED talk was called Can you learn the hardest language in the world? And I guess you can.
Yeah. Well, that was more about like the kind of mental barriers, that like even before you start learning a language, when people have already kind of decided that it's not possible,
Yeah.
or that I heard that so many times in the beginning, like you're not going to learn this language, like don't even bother. And
People do that with any language, I think. I mean, of
yeah.
course, obscure languages like Finnish and Hungarian even more so, but I spent some time with some non-language learning hobbyists over the weekend, and they were just like, I'd really like to learn French, but I'm not a language learner. And I'm like, that's interesting, because that's a mental barrier. That's not an ability. It's not a lack of ability or a lack of anything. It's just they have convinced themselves that it's not possible.
Exactly.
So therefore it becomes not possible. But when you're in the polyglot community, everyone around you is basically interested in learning languages, and everyone knows that of course you can learn any language you want if you set your mind to it. It's just really strange sometimes to step out of that bubble and listen to people who haven't even read the first thing about hobby language learners, which is another word for people in the community, I guess.
But they've probably taken classes in school and were like severely traumatized.
Yeah. And it's so sad.
It is really sad because at the same time, those teachers were also passionate about what they were teaching, but somehow like the different, I mean, depending which teacher you ended up with, but the different techniques used and the methods back then, were just...
They're still terrible, as I hear. I mean, I talked to a 17-year-old kid recently, and he was like, I've had French for 8 years and I can't say the first thing. And I was like, yeah, it's a combination of, first of all, the teacher and the method, but probably also because you told yourself early that you don't know how to do this or you can't do it. So you just blocked it off mentally for many years. And I mean, I did the same with German. I've had German. I wrote a blog post about how I've had German education for 8 years.
Yeah.
And I tested at an online test, maybe not the most accurate, but I tested at a B1 level. And you'd think 8 years. I mean, I see some of these obviously very talented people in the polyglot community. They reach B1 in 6 months or something, just studying by themselves. But then I did the math as well, and it turns out you don't have a lot of classes in a year because of weekends and holidays and blah 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 blah. And I think it turned out that in 8 years I'd only had 300 hours of German, roughly, if I came to all the classes, which I definitely didn't.
Okay.
So that's another argument that like a year is not a year. If you study an hour a day by yourself in a year, that's a lot more than in a year in a classroom or in a school or something like that. So.
And it's also about what are you putting the focus on? Like, do you actually want to speak, or do you want to know like the gender of every single noun that you're learning? So like that was the focus for our high school German class.
Yeah,
it was like, is this der, die, or das? And then all the tests were like testing, like in dem house, im house, whatever, and then it's like, okay, I know that if it's this gender, I write this. Or if it's that gender, I write that. But I don't know what the gender of this specific thing is. And then, so I was getting like mediocre grades, but it was like, okay, but can I string sentences together? And then when I went to Germany, I have an uncle who lives there, and he could see like the wheels turning in my head. Whenever I tried to like put together a sentence, he was like, stop thinking about grammar, just speak.
Yeah.
So once I actually like did that, like I use all the wrong cases all the time, but hey, I'm speaking and people understand. So like, sure, I don't know. On some level, I'm a perfectionist. On some other level, I'm not at all, because I just haven't like embraced that. Okay, it's just going to be all wrong. And with German, it just is all wrong.
Yeah, I had exactly the same experience. Like
with German.
Yeah, I was being perfectionistic, and I had the same school lecturing about cases and grammar tables. Yeah, we had to memorize them, and we had like little songs to help us and stuff. And
you had songs? We didn't have songs.
Well, maybe not a song, but definitely a little poem-ish. We would have we had when you said them all, and then you said a little thing in Danish afterwards to match the names. But anyway. That I think that what that creates is a sort of perfectionist attitude, actually. Yeah. Because you it's kind of like they tell you this is really important, And it turns out what I've learned in the last 2 years is that grammar means nothing. It doesn't mean anything, because the only important thing is, does the person across from you understand what you're saying?
Yeah.
If he understands what you're saying, you used enough grammar. If he doesn't understand, okay, we might have to work on it a little bit. But for 9 out of 10 languages, and probably 18 out of 20 sentences in any language, people can sort of get the context anyway.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I tried a little bit with Russian, running into some trouble, because I don't know why, but Russian is very hard.
So I keep hearing.
Yeah, don't do it. And what I realized is that Russian people are also not used to non-native people speaking.
Yeah.
So it was harder for me sometimes to get away with butchering the grammar, basically.
Yeah.
But now I've realized, it doesn't really matter, and it doesn't matter if it's der, die, or das.
Yeah.
If I don't remember it, it doesn't really help me to stand there and think for 15 minutes before saying a sentence. Because you will get it through context. If you live in Germany, or if you live in a German context every day, or you can make this at your house too, if you watch German TV, listen to music or whatever, you can hear it in sentences. Like, oh, okay, like you said, dem, whatever. You can hear out of context what the right grammar is.
Yeah.
And the grammar will appear in your mind as a fixed expression. So
exactly.
And
the context is so important.
That's like a native. If you ask a native German speaker to explain why it's der, die, or das, they have no clue. But for the last 20 or 30 or 50, however old they are, they have been hearing the same an article in front of that word. So they know if you start to say die Mann, they're like, that's definitely wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what I mean. And people focus on this too much, and they're like, oh, I'm not really good at pronunciation and stuff. And I just say, good enough. Get a good enough pronunciation where people don't misunderstand you. Don't worry about sounding exactly like a Frenchman if you're learning French, or somebody from Quebec. It's not about having a native-like fluency or pronunciation.
And I think at some point you can really make the language your own. So I've been having so much fun with this lately. Like, when I speak Finnish, I will say like the most outrageous things that no Finnish person would ever say, and that's what makes me memorable, like as a Finnish speaker. So once a week I coach gymnastics for like 3 hours to kids, and it's just like the most insane challenge I took on, where I was like, I really need to up my language skills, and I kind of need a job right now, so I'm just going to start teaching gymnastics. And I'd done it before in English and French, and I'd taken gymnastics in Finnish, so I had learned quite a lot of vocabulary. So I knew like the names of things. I didn't know any of the verbs though. And I didn't know the names of all the things. So now I've learned a lot. This is like my 3rd year doing it, I think. And
nice.
And so with my kids, like, I just find it so like liberating, because you can be so weird and you can be so silly. And I like with the teenagers, I'm like, hey, help me, what's this word? But with the younger kids, I don't like, I'll just say like a really weird thing. And I'm missing half the vocab, so I have to find really interesting ways of saying things. And it's just gotten to be so much fun. And some kids have asked me, like, why do you speak weird? But at the same time, they're always, like, learning. And they're always, like, looking at adults. And they don't think, like, oh, my God, that adult is so weird. They're thinking, like, what does that adult know that I don't know? And trying to get something from you. So in that sense, I found that's been, like, probably the thing that's accelerated my Finnish the most, and it was putting myself in this super uncomfortable like, right. Okay, for the next 3 hours I have to speak Finnish and nobody can translate for me. So but really, like, making the language your own, and kind of like, okay, you're gonna say this wrong, you're not gonna express this like a native speaker, but the only way to figure out how a native speaker would eventually express this is to do it your own way.
Yeah.
And I think that's really beaten down the perfectionist in me, at least in Finnish.
Right.
So yes, I warmly encourage everyone out there to give that a try with whatever.
Start gymnastics classes and
yeah.
Teach the kids how to do barrel rolls, or I don't know.
Yeah. The somersaults and all that stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been great fun. But unfortunately, as with all good things, we've spent too long. And it's over. Time is up. But
All right.
time has flown by. I mean, it's crazy how when you get into these very interesting topics. I mean, why are there no university degrees about these things that we're talking about? I would be a PhD in no time. But it's always like some kind of sideline or grammar related. So, but I'm really happy to talk to you about this. And will we see you in Berlin this year?
I actually can't make it. I signed up and I was like, I will pay later. And then I saw that it was full. And then I was like, okay, I should probably email someone to let them know that I can't make it this year. But I'm gonna try to make it to the next event or then the next gathering, because I already miss you guys all so much, and I just want to get my my fix.
Yeah, well, or you can go to back to Montreal as well in July. But obviously that's a much greater trek than just going to Berlin.
Yeah. Well, it's close to quote unquote home, but I've already gotten my flights for this year, and they're not going to be in July. So that
right. July is so expensive to go to Canada. Why is that?
Because it's summer holidays, so like that's the most expensive time to fly.
Canada into the summer holidays.
Yeah, but I think any flights to and from like anywhere during June, July, August are like crazy expensive.
North American Polyglot Symposium organizers, if you're listening, don't put it in July. No, it's going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to visiting Canada. I've never been there, but
so you are going. Awesome.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I don't know how, but my strategy with all these events is pay as early as possible, because then when I get to the actual event, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I already paid for this. I don't need to find any money for it.
Yeah.
That helps me. But I'm looking forward to visiting Canada. But for some reason, Danish people are often compared to Canadians. We're kind of like the Canada of Europe. We've got nice healthcare, and we don't mind people taking the mickey out of us. And so it's similar in that respect.
Happy people.
Oh yeah, the happiest people in the world. Some years, apparently.
Yeah, and the greatest cities to live or whatnot.
Well, also most expensive, but anyway. But anyway.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I've had so much fun discussing with you, some of my favorite topics to talk about, so I love nerding out about them.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience and your observations. I guess that's very important, and best of luck in the Finnish. Your summer is coming up. I guess you're excited about that.
Yeah, light, sun, maybe.
Go to the beach and...
Yeah, maybe. If it's like plus, over 15 degrees or something.
Fantastic. Well, I hope to see you soon in person anyway.
Yeah, me too. It's been great fun. Until we meet again.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast.